Welcome back to SPED 780, Module 8 for Math Instruction. I'm excited to really dig into what some of these strategies look like, and we're going to take a look at primarily vocabulary development. How do we do that within the math classroom? Because remember, this course in general is about content-specific secondary strategies. So when we have those students with disabilities in those content area courses like math, how can we support them? And one of the things we can do as special educators is really build up that math vocabulary and support that, because it plays such an integral role in students mastering the math content that they're being presented with. So I want us to think a little bit about literacy in math and what that looks like. We know from the past module on reading how important literacy is, and also how challenging it can be for our students with special needs, whether they're reading on grade level or comprehending on grade level. Well, this also really affects math, right? So when we think about successful readers, and we're thinking about math literacy, successful readers make meaning of and from symbols, right? Letters, words, pictures, diagrams, models. We're asked to do that in math, right, when we're learning new math content, when we're working out of a math textbook. So when we think about comprehension in math, we're looking at how do students use context clues maybe to solve a word problem, or how do they summarize their findings when they're doing a real-world application of math. How do they interpret models, charts, graphs, diagrams, interpret symbols of information that they're looking at. How do they make predictions, right? Predictions is a big part of math. How do they do that within the context of comprehension? And then when we look at the role that vocabulary plays, right, it's helping us utilize those context clues. It's building up this content vocabulary that's very specific to math. Some of the words we don't encounter during our daily life, right, at all. It's very, very just specific to that math instruction. And then really being able to decode symbolic meaning. Now when we look at the role that writing plays in math, so getting back to the module that you just finished, okay, when we look at writing, remember we talked about writing to learn, right, and versus learning to write. So writing to learn within the math class means that we're applying writing skills and strategies for different purposes, right? We're using it to communicate what we're learning. This can be really related to mathematic proficiency or literacy in math. So one of the ways that we use writing within math instruction is to do kind of a compare and contrast. So if we're working on a math application, being able to write a compare and contrast, being able to verbally talk about comparing and contrasting some type of problem, okay? Creating an effective response to answer a problem. So if we're solving, for example, a real-world application, are we able to write an answer that clearly demonstrates our understanding of that? Are we able to write the symbols correctly to illustrate the concept? All of those different symbols related to math. And then just being able to really develop, evaluate, revise an effective plan to solve a complex problem, okay? So all of these pieces are related to literacy in math, and this is what I want us to focus on primarily within this video about strategies for math. So why do we teach math vocabulary, okay? If you think about content area textbooks, the conceptual load in those, the vocabulary load in those is remarkable, right? It's got all kinds of abstract concepts. The reading level of a math textbook is typically pretty high. The sentence structure is complex. The vocabulary, the academic vocabulary of it is very challenging, okay? So one of the things that we see students struggle with special needs in this is that there are a large number of new or unfamiliar words within math that they don't have prior knowledge of, that they aren't able to connect to their prior knowledge or prior math experiences, and it really creates barriers in their comprehension, okay? So math vocabulary really is unique in both that it has words for general and specific meaning, okay, that we interact with in the math class and outside of the math class. And so we know that vocabulary development is strongly correlated with comprehension. Comprehension is critical if we're going to have mastery of skills, right? We also know, research has told us that vocabulary is a great predictor of student comprehension. So if we have a lack of that vocabulary development, it can really negatively affect the learning content. So let's think about a scenario here on teaching math vocabulary. Let's say you have a student with a learning disability who is in a pre-algebra class, okay, in high school. Or same type of answer for this scenario. Let's say you have a fourth grader who is struggling in the general ed math classroom. But both of these students are still going into that general ed setting. They have support in that classroom. And then we have some pull-out time we're working on math. Well, what do we do during that pull-out time? One of the things we can do is pre-teach math vocabulary. So when they go into that general ed setting, they have this foundation, they have this prior knowledge that they can build on related to the vocabulary, where they can increase their comprehension of the information that the teacher's presenting or increase their comprehension of what they're reading in the math textbook. So how do we teach math vocabulary? That's the big question, right? So we want to, of course, introduce terms. We're going to take a look at a planning tool we can use to do that and how that would work. Okay? We want to encourage students to speak mathematically. I think this is interesting because we want them to not only know the words, but we want to really teach them about how to talk with the words, right? How to talk through how they arrived at an answer using that language. It just gives them a much more complex understanding of that problem, okay? Or that equation, or how to solve that type of application, okay? And then teaching them word combinations. So the word value has a lot of different meanings, right? In math, we could look at place value versus absolute value. So really breaking down those word combinations for them and really teaching them specifically how to understand those words, how to use them in math, how to speak with those words and talk about math with the correct vocabulary. Here's kind of an example of vocabulary development. Okay, this is called the Freyer model for vocabulary development. And I like this because it gives the student kind of 4 key ways of remembering the word through a graphic organizer. I love graphic organizers. They're such a great way of us laying out for students an idea or a concept and giving them a number of ways to remember it. So they write down the word, okay? For example, in this example, the word is functions. They write down some light bulb words, and that means what are some words that come to mind as I'm thinking about that word that's going to help me remember its meaning. So their light bulb words were input, output, or XY, okay? And then range equals outputs, it looks like what they have there, okay? Then they write a definition for the word, and then they draw a picture that's going to help them remember it. This is a great, simple way to do vocabulary development with students. There are some resources within the instructional materials for this module where you can find a couple more strategies for vocabulary development and find some resources specifically to the Freyer model for vocabulary development. But this has been researched and studied. It's been proven effective. It's a very simple tool to use, easily reproduced in the classroom, right? We can even draw these 4 blocks out. We don't even have to have a worksheet with this graphic organizer on it. And a great way to consistently be teaching vocabulary, teaching students to do these 4 things when they encounter a new word. Look at the word, create those light bulb words that are going to help them remember, write that definition, and draw a picture to help you remember it, okay? Here's another type of planning for instruction for vocabulary development within math. And I like this, called the 5 C's of planning for instruction. So the first one is concept. So what mathematic words are in this lesson? Okay. The second is content. What subject matter words are in this lesson? The third is clarify. So which words should I mention or clarify? And then 4, which words should I rephrase or eliminate? So what are the words I'm going to kind of knock out there that students don't need or they're not ready for? And then 5 is construct. Which words should I teach? So you've got the word, the definition or the context, and when to teach it. Okay. This is a great template to use really with any content area vocabulary instruction. but really good for math. And this is something you could take to the general ed teacher and say, okay, what do you feel like are the critical terms that you're going to be using in instruction this week? We write those down. What are some subject matter words we know we're going to be using this week or we've been building on from the previous lessons? And then you can take that and fill in the rest of this planning document to give you really good information on what to teach to the students or what to have paras working with the students on, okay, in terms of really building up that math vocabulary. This is really critical. I hadn't thought about math vocabulary development as much in terms of looking at math instruction for our students with disabilities until I had a conversation with an English as a second language learner teacher about math. And we were talking about how students who are learning English as a second language, the terminology and vocabulary in math can be really challenging. It's almost like learning a foreign language beyond even English because it's so complex. And talking about how we specifically teach that vocabulary and that language to students in a very strategic way. And I thought, gosh, that makes sense to me. And that also makes sense to me for our students with disabilities who, cognitively maybe aren't processing information the same. The parts of the brain aren't all communicating the same as maybe a typical developing peer. And wow, how big would it be if we really developed up that math vocabulary and created that foundation that students are able to have that language to not only perform those skills and understand it as they're reading it, but also verbally be talking about math in a way that really increases their comprehension. So I think that's really critical to think about, is looking at developing math vocabulary. And this is a great thing to do in a resource room setting as a support to the classroom, or to do in a small group setting in the classroom to support that teacher. That math content teacher, they're going to have the content knowledge, right? They're going to know the sequencing that takes place within learning math. They're going to know how to introduce those concepts. What we bring to the table as special educators are really those strategies to help students that are struggling, those really effective instructional practices that really can beef up instruction in the general ed classroom. And this is a great example of that, is how you can really be a good resource to those content area teachers. Demonstrating an instructional strategy, taking the lead on this instructional strategy to help that content area teacher help those students be more successful in the classroom. Next, I want you to take a look at Part 3, Math in the IEP.